I normally start with the past, but I want to start with the current here. We saw the news recently, the Afghanistan papers, in which the portrayal of what's happening in Afghanistan, perhaps a bit more rosy coming from the U.S. government than what was actually on the ground. You've been on the ground several times. What's your take?
It's kind of twofold, or there's many facets to this diamond. The first take is that the American people have a very short attention span, and they want things wrapped up in a very short period of time. We as a nation took almost 100 years before we formed, after writing our Constitution, before we formed a society, read out corruption, the Civil War, etc. So it really wasn't until after the Civil War that we formed the nation that our forefathers presented. So to say that we're going to start a nation from scratch and be done in 15 years is ludicrous. It would take a long time to do the things we need to do in Afghanistan. And we've abandoned Afghanistan 3 times before. In the 60s, in fact, the opium war, most of the opium comes from Afghanistan. That's a direct result of all the goodwill we did in Marja and in the other areas in Afghanistan. Now, those irrigation ditches and farms that we built in the 60s are what they used to produce opium. We abandoned them in the 90s. After the Soviet Union fell, we left them, and we left them to falter. So we've abandoned them a 3rd time. This would be a severe mistake. So it's going to take at least 20 years to move the society back to a place where they can begin to grow. So if you look at it this way, 12 years after we were there, around the 15th year was the first time that we educated boys and girls from 1st to 12th grade. So the biggest problem Afghanistan have is a lack of education and lack of world awareness. So if those kids are just going to college now, it will be another 10 years before we produce more credible leaders with values that can perpetuate a society to grow in a moral fashion. The next thing is it being rosy. I think that soldiers on the ground have always said what their situation was. One of the problems that we have, that I noticed in my field, is that as one unit left, the other unit came and started from scratch. So this gave kind of a treadmill effect to our success. So a better way of fighting the war is what we did in World War II. A unit's there, we replace the unit, but you have one unified theory of how things should go. You have one connection to the people. You have one avenue for communication. By switching so often, 6 to 9 months, we have created the problem that allowed the enemy to constantly grow and replenish themselves. So the American people must understand it's going to take longer than 20 years, and we owe that to them for abandoning them 3 times. I don't think that the Afghan papers were correct. From my understanding, we've been saying this the whole time. What politicians hear is different than what the soldiers say. And it's been the 3rd time that the CIA, the intelligence community, the diplomatic corps, the soldiers and sailors and airmen on the ground have said, this is the situation. So what politicians are hearing and how they twist it is very different than what we've been saying. So I don't think there was any deceit there. I think there was more of selective hearing so that they could sell it or not sell it to the American people, who pretty much don't understand what the war is about, how to fight an insurgency, the complexity of fighting an insurgency or a counterinsurgency battle, and what goes into rebuilding a nation. We can do it, and we're almost there. If we leave now, it'll be another disaster.
Very good. So you have seen progress on the ground.
I've seen a tremendous amount of progress on the ground. The progress is mainly in the people. Let me give you a short example. In 2008, when I was there was a superstition that Afghans couldn't take blood, that somehow when you're giving blood for disaster, that was a bad thing, they were doing poor things. A lot of soldiers, a lot of Afghan soldiers died because of that just superstition. In 2015, when I was there was a bombing in Kandahar, and within an hour there were over 300 people in line to give blood. So in just that short period of time, we went from a superstitious view where soldiers were dying because of a lack of blood and plasma to understanding the science behind blood transfusion and that it was a good thing and that it saved lives. So that's a tangible example of changing minds, changing hearts, and educating people from the dark ages to at least where they can see light and see a way to grow.
You have a lot of experience in Afghanistan, partly because of 9/11. You were successful in the financial world here. You had already served. What happened?
9/11 happened. So in February, March, I wrote a note saying, I'm done. I served since I think December 1980 is when I raised my right hand to come in. And I thought I had accomplished everything I needed to. It was mainly peacetime. I served sometime almost 6 years supporting the counter-drug mission, putting bad guys away, helping law enforcement and the intelligence world, but I hadn't been in war. 9/11 happened, and I felt that if I was a true officer, if I was a true warrior, that I couldn't leave my fellow soldiers with my knowledge and experience. I couldn't leave the young privates, the young sergeants, on their own to execute a war against our nation. So I felt that it was my obligation, it was my duty, it was my sacred responsibility to pull my retirement papers back and then serve.
What do you think now about that decision?
I would do it over again. When the war started, my son was just entering first grade. When I finally came back home, I think he was a junior, sophomore going to junior in high school. So it took a lot of time away from my family, my son and daughter. It took a lot of time away from my wife. I think in the 25 years that we've been married, I probably have been gone away from exercises, from training events, from executing war, than I have actually been physically with her, and I'm a reservist with that. So the lie of 1 week in a month went out the window real fast. But unless we have people that are willing to sacrifice for our freedoms, then we will never have freedoms. So paying the costs to support our freedom and our government, to support our community, support my family, so that they can be free and that they can grow and that they can develop in a way where they don't have to worry about war. That's my obligation. That's my sacred duty. That's my calling as a warrior.
We see all the divisiveness here at home. Did you experience that abroad in the military as well?
No. When you serve, and one of the problems I have with this administration is that when you serve, whether you're a bureaucrat, whether you're in the State Department and military, who the party is, etc., it goes out the window. It doesn't matter what party you're from, because what you serve to protect is the Constitution, not a party, and especially not a person. We fought against England to get rid of kings. I once had a chance to meet one of the royal family, and they were uniquely unimpressed. I was impressed. And my answer to them was, I really don't care that you're a member of the royal family, because I'm an American, and in America we don't have kings. No person by position of their birth has a right to rule over another. And that is such a core belief in me that it goes to the marrow of my bones. So any movement toward making a new king in America, I will always vehemently attack and work against. So it bothers me that we don't understand what those rights that we give up to serve, whether you're public service, those sacrifices that we give to protect our community, that not having that understanding of what we go through as public servants and what public service means really bothers me. So with the division, I think that if more Americans understood what it took to keep us free, they would have less division.
You're a lieutenant colonel. What message of leadership do you like to pass on when you're talking to someone that needs that message?
It's not about me. My responsibility as a leader is not for you to praise me, is not to be worshiped, it's not so that my head can get big and my ego can grow. My responsibility is to protect and preserve the life of the very least person in my unit. So if that private isn't fed, I don't eat. If that private is cold, then I'm colder. If that private is wet, I'm wetter. So service, leadership is about service to the other, not praise of me. So I'm intelligent, I have all these other gifts, etc. And that gift is, I believe, is given by God so that I can serve others. So once service becomes about yourself, then you're no longer a leader, you're a demagogue, and you should be eliminated from service to our community, from service to others. So service is all about helping the lowest, helping the least rise. That's what service is. That's what leadership is. You don't lead so people follow. You lead to build. And so what's build? I tell my son, I say, if you, and my daughter also, if you wind up where I'm at, then I've failed. Your job is to stand on my carcass and grow and reach higher. And your job is to provide for your children to reach higher. So if you wind up where I'm at, then I've done something wrong. Your job is to use my weary bones and everything that I've gone through to grow further. And if you stand on my shoulder and reach twice as high, that's what I'm here for. And that's what every person should be. And as a leader, when that private then grows and I'm an old man in a nursing home, and he says, hey, because of you I've accomplished X, Y, and Z, then I've served my purpose. And if they go further than I have ever gone, then that's my obligation to them, is to make that path so that they can grow, so that they can develop.
I can't even imagine what you saw overseas, the good and the bad. How do you move past that? How do you come back here and live a life with your wife and have 2 kids, talk with me like this?
Well, first I have to give credit to my wife. My wife is an incredible human being. And no matter what my son and daughter says, they're pretty good. And then past my wife, I have to give it to my children. A funny story, when I came back, having night sweats and nightmares and stuff, and my son had me in tears because what he would do is he would come in the morning and like wake me up and watch me reach for my weapon and try to load a weapon I didn't have, and then I realized where I'm at, and he would crack up laughing. So we got past the PTSD phase because they have children with a sick sense of humor. Yeah. So we laughed through it, and they accepted me back, and they performed greatly. My daughter was an honor student. She graduated from college with honors. My son was an honor student. He's now finishing his 4th year at MIT. So my daughter's honors at RIT. So when you have a family that loves you, and you're wrapped in their love, is easier to come back to. You always have a beacon of hope, and I think that that as a leader, and if you're founded and grounded, and whether you call it God or whatever, then you always have a beacon to moor to. If you're unmoored, then I think those are the people that sometimes we lose. I'm not saying always, but sometimes we lose people who are unmoored before they left. And they experience the worst of the worst and have nothing to moor their anchors to.
That's a good way to put it.
I just love, you can tell a leader, you can tell a good leader, because their people grow, and they grow beyond anything they can imagine. So if your troops are happy, if your employees are happy, and they have more aspirations and greater aspirations, that's a sign that as a leader you're doing your job.